My wife's affair led to a shocking pregnancy, but the real twist was yet to come. Discovering her secret life unveiled a darker mystery I never expected. Hey everyone, I really need some advice and maybe a bit of a reality check. I'm not sure how to even start this, but here goes. I'm a 32-year-old guy and my life has been turned upside down in the last few months. A bit of background: I've been married to my wife Emily for 8 years. We have 2 kids, a 5-year-old son named Liam and a 3-year-old daughter named Ava. Emily and I met in college and we hit it off right away. She was the love of my life. My rock, and I thought we were perfect for each other. Things were great for a long time. I have a decent job in IT, and Emily has been a stay-at-home mom since Ava was born. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing too serious, or so I thought. A few months ago, Emily started acting differently. She was distant, spending more time on her phone, and going out more often VJGNG to run errands or catch up with friends. I didn't think much of it at first, but then she started getting texts at odd hours and would smile at her phone like a teenager in love. I should have seen the red flags, but I was too busy with work and taking care of the kids. One night, Emily told me she was going out with some friends for a girls' night. I didn't question it, but something didn't feel right. I decided to follow her. Yeah, I know it sounds creepy, but I had this gut feeling that something was off. I waited until she left and then followed her in my car. She didn't go to the usual bar where she and her friends hang out. Instead, she got into a taxi. I kept my distance and followed the taxi. It drove to a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town, and Emily got out in front of an apartment building. She buzzed up, and a guy came down to let her in. He was in his late 20s, wearing a casual t-shirt and jeans. They hugged and kissed, and I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I didn't confront her then. I drove back home feeling numb. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. Emily, the woman I had loved and trusted for so many years, was cheating on me with some random guy. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus at work and I was distant at home. Emily noticed but didn't say anything. I think she thought I was just stressed about work. I finally decided to confront her. One night after the kids were asleep, I asked her to sit down and talk. I told her I knew about her affair. At first she denied it, but when I told her I had followed her, she broke down and confessed. She said she met the guy, Alex, a few months ago when he was her taxi driver. They started talking, and one thing led to another. I was furious and heartbroken. I asked her why she did it, and she said she felt neglected and unappreciated. She claimed Alex made her feel special and loved in a way I hadn't for a long time. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I knew we had our issues, but I never thought it would come to this. Emily begged me to forgive her, saying it was a mistake and that she loved me and the kids. She promised to cut off all contact with Alex and work on our marriage. I was torn. Part of me wanted to kick her out and never see her again, but another part of me still loved her and wanted to believe we could fix things. We decided to try couples therapy. The first few sessions were rough. Emily was defensive and I was angry and hurt. But slowly we started to make some progress. We talked about our issues, our needs, and how we could rebuild trust. Then a few weeks ago, something happened that threw everything into chaos again. Emily told me she was pregnant. At first, I was overjoyed. But then, the doubt crept in. What if the baby wasn't mine? What if it was Alex? I confronted Emily about it and she broke down again. She admitted she wasn't sure who the father was. That was the final straw for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her I needed some time to think and moved out to stay with a friend. Now I'm sitting here writing this post and I don't know what to do. I love Emily, but I don't know if I can ever trust her again. And the thought of raising another man's child is tearing me apart. I need some advice. Has anyone been through something similar? How do you move past something like this? Can trust ever be rebuilt after such a betrayal? It's been a few weeks since my last post and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone who offered advice and support. It really helped me to see things more clearly and make some tough decisions. After moving out, I stayed with my friend Jake. He's been a rock for me through all of this, letting me crash at his place and listening to me vent. I needed that space to clear my head and figure out what to do next. Emily and I continued with therapy, but it was clear that things weren't getting better. The pregnancy was a huge elephant in the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that the baby might not be mine, and Emily's uncertainty only made it worse. One night, Jake and I were having a few beers, and he suggested something that I hadn't considered. He said I should get a paternity test as soon as the baby is born. It wasn't something I wanted to think about, but he was right. I needed to know the truth for my own sanity and for the future of our family. I brought it up with Emily in our next therapy session. She was hesitant at first, but eventually she agreed. She said she understood why I needed to do it and that she was willing to do whatever it took to fix our marriage. We agreed to get the test done as soon as the baby was born. In the meantime, I moved back home. It was awkward and tense at first, but we tried to make it work for the kids' sake. We kept going to therapy, and I tried to focus on rebuilding our relationship. Emily cut off all contact with Alex, and she was making an effort to show me that she was committed to fixing things. Then, out of the blue, Alex showed up at our house. Emily was out with the kids, and I was home alone. He knocked on the door, and I opened it to find him standing there, looking nervous and desperate. He said he needed to talk to Emily. I told him to leave, that she didn't want to see him anymore, but he insisted. He told me he loved her, and that he was willing to fight for her. I couldn't believe the nerve of this guy. I told him to get lost and slammed the door in his face. I was shaking with anger and fear. What if Emily still had feelings for him? What if she left me for him? When Emily got home, I told her what happened. She was furious that he showed up and promised me that she had no interest in seeing him again. She even called him in front of me and told him to stay away. That gave me some reassurance, but I was still on edge. As the weeks went by, things started to improve. We were communicating better, and I felt like we were making real progress. Then Emily went into labor. It was a whirlwind of emotions. I was excited, scared, and anxious all at once. The birth went smoothly, and we welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world. We named her Sophie. Holding her in my arms for the first time was an overwhelming experience. I felt an instant connection to her, but the doubt still lingered in the back of my mind. We did the paternity test as soon as we could. The wait for the results was agonizing. Emily and I both tried to stay positive and focus on the baby, but it was always there, hanging over us. Finally, the results came in. I could barely bring myself to open the envelope. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding. Emily sat next to me, holding my hand. I took a deep breath and opened it. Sophie was mine. The relief I felt was indescribable. I broke down in tears, and so did Emily. We hugged each other tightly, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted off our shoulders. With the paternity issue resolved, we were able to focus on rebuilding our marriage. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of time and effort, but we were committed to making it work. We continued with therapy, and slowly but surely, things started to get better. Life started to settle into a new routine. Sophie was a joy, and Liam and Ava adored their baby sister. Emily and I were working hard on our relationship, and it felt like we were finally getting back on track. Then, just when I thought things were getting better, another twist hit us out of nowhere. Emily received a letter from Alex. It was an apology letter, saying how sorry he was for everything he had caused. He claimed he had moved to another state to start fresh and wanted to make amends. He also mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He said he had seen Emily with another man before they got together, and wondered if she was truly committed to fixing her marriage. I confronted Emily about the letter, and she denied ever seeing anyone else. She was adamant that Alex was lying to stir up trouble. I wanted to believe her, but the seeds of doubt were planted once again. I decided to do some digging. I started looking through Emily's phone records and found something suspicious. There were a few numbers that she had been calling and texting frequently. I called one of the numbers, and a man answered. I hung up immediately, my heart racing. The next day, I decided to follow Emily again. I felt guilty about it, but I needed to know the truth. She said she was going out to run errands, so I trailed her from a distance. She drove to a coffee shop and met up with a guy I didn't recognize. They talked for a while, and it seemed innocent enough, but then they hugged and kissed before parting ways. I felt like I was going to be sick. I couldn't believe this was happening again. I confronted Emily as soon as she got home. She tried to deny it at first, but then she broke down and confessed. She said the guy was an old friend from high school, and they had reconnected recently. She claimed it was just a kiss and nothing more, but I didn't believe her. I was done. I told her I couldn't do this anymore and that I wanted a divorce. She begged me to reconsider, but I was resolute. I couldn't live with the constant doubt and betrayal. I packed my bags and moved back in with Jake. The divorce process was messy and painful. We fought over custody of the kids in the house. In the end, we agreed to joint custody, and I moved into a small apartment nearby to stay close to Liam, Ava, and Sophie. The first few months after the divorce were tough. I missed my kids terribly, and it was hard adjusting to life on my own. But slowly, I started to heal. I threw myself into my work and spent as much time as I could with the kids. One day, I got a call from Emily. She sounded distraught and asked if we could talk. I reluctantly agreed and met her at a park. She looked exhausted and stressed out. She told me she had been diagnosed with depression and was struggling to cope. She apologized for everything she had put me through and asked for my forgiveness. I didn't know what to say. Part of me still loved her and wanted to help, but another part of me was still angry and hurt. I told her I appreciated her honesty and that I hoped she would get the help she needed. We talked for a while and it felt like a small step towards closure. A few weeks later, I got another surprise. Jake set me up on a blind date with one of his co-workers, Sarah. I was hesitant at first, but he insisted she was a great person and that I should give it a shot. I agreed and we went out for dinner. Sarah was amazing. She was funny, smart, and we hit it off right away. We started dating, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. She was understanding about my past and supportive of my efforts to be a good dad. Emily continued to work on her issues, and we eventually reached a point where we could co-parent effectively. We were civil and even friendly at times, but the romantic feelings were gone. Life wasn't perfect, but it was getting better. I had a great relationship with my kids and a wonderful new partner. The scars from the past were still there, but they were healing. As things began to stabilize in my life, I found myself slowly but surely embracing this new chapter. Sarah and I grew closer, and her presence was a breath of fresh air. We shared many wonderful moments, from spontaneous weekend getaways to cozy nights in, watching movies, and just enjoying each other's company. My kids adored her, and she had a natural way of fitting into our lives without stepping on Emily's toes. One day, Sarah suggested we take a family trip to the mountains. It was something I had always wanted to do, and I thought it would be a great way for all of us to bond even further. Emily agreed that it was a good idea, so we planned a weekend getaway. The trip was amazing. We hiked, explored nature, and even did a bit of fishing. Liam and Ava were thrilled to be outside, and Sophie, though still a baby, seemed to enjoy the fresh air. It was the first time in a long while that I felt truly at peace. But as always, life had another surprise waiting around the corner. When we got back, I received a call from an old college friend, Matt. We hadn't spoken in years, but he had heard about my divorce through the grapevine and wanted to catch up. We arranged to meet for lunch the next day. Over lunch, Matt told me about his recent experiences. He had been through a rough divorce as well, and was now focused on his career as a private investigator. His stories were fascinating and full of intrigue, and it was clear he had found his calling. At some point, the conversation shifted to my situation, and I opened up about everything that had happened with Emily. Matt listened intently and then offered a suggestion. He proposed looking into Alex's background, just to see if there was more to the story than Emily knew. I was hesitant at first, but curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. A week later, Matt called with some interesting findings. Alex wasn't just a random taxi driver. He had a criminal record for fraud and had been involved in a few shady business deals. It seemed he had a history of manipulating women and using them for financial gain. This revelation shook me to the core. I realized that Emily might have been a victim in more ways than one. I decided to share this information with Emily, hoping it might help her move on. When I told her, she was shocked and horrified. She had no idea about Alex's past and felt a mix of anger and betrayal. It was a tough pill to swallow, but it also gave her a sense of closure. As Emily and I continued to co-parent and work through our issues, Sarah remained a constant source of support. She encouraged me to stay focused on the future and not dwell too much on the past. With her help, I began to see that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Then, just when things seemed to be settling down, I received another unexpected visitor. One evening, while I was home alone, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find a woman in her late 30s standing there. She introduced herself as Laura and said she needed to talk to me about Alex. Laura explained that she was Alex's ex-wife. She had been trying to track him down for months because he had left her and their son with a mountain of debt. She had managed to find my address through some mutual acquaintances and hoped I could help her locate Alex. I was taken aback by her story and invited her in. Over the next hour, Laura shared her harrowing experiences with Alex. It was clear that he was a manipulative and deceitful person who had left a trail of broken lives behind him. Laura was desperate to find him and get some closure for herself and her son. I told Laura everything I knew about Alex and shared Matt's findings with her. She was grateful for the information and said it would help her in her search. Before she left, she gave me her contact information and asked me to keep in touch if I learned anything new. A few days later, Laura called me with some news. She had managed to track down Alex's current whereabouts. He was living in a small town a few hours away and had started a new life under a different name. Laura was planning to confront him and wanted to know if I would come with her for support. I was hesitant at first, but then I thought about all the pain Alex had caused, not just to Emily and me, but to Laura and her son as well. I agreed to go with her and we planned to meet up the next day. The confrontation was intense. We found Alex working at a small cafe and Laura didn't waste any time. She marched right up to him and demanded answers. Alex looked stunned and tried to deny everything at first, but Laura wasn't having any of it. She laid out all the evidence she had gathered, and Alex's facade crumbled. He admitted to everything DJ, his fraudulent activities, his manipulation, and his lies. He apologized, but it was clear he was only doing it to save face. Laura told him she was taking him to court for the money he owed and that he would never see their son again. Alex tried to plead with her, but she was resolute. After the confrontation, Laura and I parted ways. She thanked me for my support and promised to keep me updated on her progress. As I drove back home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was glad to have helped Laura, but I also felt a deep sadness for everything that had happened. Life slowly returned to normal, and the days turned into weeks. Emily continued to work on her issues, and our co-parenting relationship improved. Sarah and I grew closer, and our bond strengthened with each passing day. Then one evening, Sarah and I were having dinner when she dropped a bombshell. She told me she was pregnant. I was stunned, but also incredibly happy. We hadn't been planning for a baby, but the news was a welcome surprise. We decided to tell the kids together. Liam and Ava were thrilled at the idea of having a new sibling, and Sophie, though too young to understand, seemed to sense the excitement in the air. Emily took the news surprisingly well, congratulating us and expressing her support. As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The past few years had been a whirlwind of emotions, but I felt like I was finally in a good place. I had a wonderful partner, a growing family, and a sense of closure from the past. One day I received a letter from Laura. She had won her court case against Alex and was finally able to move on with her life. She thanked me again for my support and wished me all the best. It was a touching reminder of how far I had come. The day Sarah gave birth was one of the happiest days of my life. We welcomed a healthy baby boy into the world and named him Ethan. Holding him in my arms, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything I had. As the years passed, our family grew closer. Emily and I maintained a respectful co-parenting relationship, and the kids thrived in a loving environment. Sarah and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by our closest friends and family. Just when I thought life had finally settled into a rhythm of normalcy and happiness, another unexpected twist came my way. It was a Saturday morning, and Sarah, the kids, and I were having breakfast together. We were planning to take the kids to the zoo that day, something they had been looking forward to all week. As we were getting ready to leave, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But something told me to answer. On the other end of the line was a woman who introduced herself as Detective Laura Martinez. She told me she was investigating a case related to Alex and needed to speak with me urgently. My heart skipped a beat. I told Sarah about the call, and she looked as concerned as I felt. I assured her I would be fine and told her to go ahead and take the kids to the zoo without me. I would meet up with them later. I drove to the address Detective Martinez had given me. It was a nondescript building downtown, and I felt a sense of dread as I walked inside. The detective greeted me and led me to a small conference room. She got straight to the point. Alex had been found dead in his apartment, and the circumstances were suspicious. I was stunned. The last time I had seen Alex, he had been confronted by Laura, his ex-wife, but I hadn't heard anything about him since then. Detective Martinez explained that Alex's death was being treated as a possible homicide, and they were interviewing everyone connected to him. I told her everything I knew about Alex and our tumultuous history. She listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. As I recounted the events, I couldn't help but wonder who could have done this. Alex had certainly made many enemies, but murder. After the interview, I left the station feeling shaken. I called Sarah and told her what had happened. She was shocked but supportive, telling me to come to the zoo and be with the kids to take my mind off things. I took her advice and spent the day trying to focus on my family. A few days later, Detective Martinez called me again. She had more questions and wanted to meet in person. I agreed, and this time she dropped a bombshell. Emily's name had come up in the investigation. Apparently, Alex had been in contact with Emily shortly before his death. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily? My ex-wife, who had been working so hard to move past her mistakes and rebuild her life. I felt a mix of anger and confusion. Why would she be in touch with Alex again? I confronted Emily about it. She looked genuinely surprised and distressed. She admitted that Alex had reached out to her, claiming he wanted to apologize and make amends for everything he had done. She insisted that she had only met with him once and that it was a brief conversation. She had no idea he was dead. The situation was spiraling out of control. I didn't know what to believe, but I knew I had to protect my family. Sarah was supportive as always, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We decided to hire a lawyer to help navigate this mess and ensure we were prepared for anything that might come our way. The investigation continued, and the more I learned, the more complicated things became. It turned out that Alex had been involved in some serious criminal activities beyond the fraud we knew about. He had ties to organized crime and had been under surveillance by law enforcement for months. His death had likely been a result of his dangerous connections catching up to him. As the weeks went by, Emily's involvement seemed to be nothing more than a red herring. She was cleared of any suspicion, but the damage was done. Our fragile co-parenting relationship had taken a hit, and the stress of the investigation had left us both exhausted. One evening, as Sarah and I were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, she took my hand and told me something that took me by surprise. She had been doing some research on her own and had uncovered something about Alex that neither of us knew. He had a brother, Mark, who had been estranged from him for years. Mark lived in another state and had cut off all contact with Alex after a falling out over some shady business dealings. Sarah suggested that maybe Mark knew more about Alex's criminal connections and could provide some insight into his death. I was hesitant, but Sarah's determination convinced me to reach out to Mark. I found Mark's contact information online and gave him a call. He was wary at first, but when I explained who I was and why I was calling, he agreed to meet. Sarah and I flew out to meet him, hoping to get some answers. Mark turned out to be a quiet, reserved man in his early 40s. He welcomed us into his home and listened as we explained everything that had happened. When we mentioned Alex's death, he looked pained, but not surprised. He told us that Alex had always been drawn to dangerous people and risky schemes. Mark shared some details about Alex's past that shocked us. Alex had been involved in drug trafficking and money laundering, and his criminal activities had put him on the radar of some very dangerous individuals. Mark believed that Alex's death was likely a result of crossing the wrong people. With this new information, we returned home and shared it with Detective Martinez. She thanked us and assured us that they would follow up on the leads. It felt like we were finally getting somewhere, but there was still a sense of unease hanging over us. As time passed, the investigation into Alex's death seemed to hit a dead end. The police were unable to identify his killers, and the case eventually went cold. It was frustrating, but there was nothing more we could do. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Emily and I continued to work on our co-parenting relationship, and things between Sarah and me grew stronger. We were determined to put the past behind us and focus on our future. Then, just when we thought we had seen the last of the drama, another twist emerged. One day, I received a letter in the mail from an anonymous sender. Inside was a note that read, "You don't know the whole story. Alex was just the beginning. Be careful who you trust." I felt a chill run down my spine. Who could have sent this? What did it mean? I showed the letter to Sarah and Emily, and we were all on edge. It seemed like the nightmare wasn't over yet. Determined to uncover the truth, I reached out to Matt, my private investigator friend, once again. He agreed to help me look into the letter and see if we could find out who sent it and what it meant. As Matt began his investigation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Strange things started happening. I noticed unfamiliar cars parked near our house, and there were odd phone calls with no one on the other end. Sarah and I were on high alert, and I made sure the kids were never out of my sight. One evening, Matt called with some unsettling news. He had traced the letter to a P.O. box rented by someone using a fake name. The surveillance footage from the post office showed a man in a hoodie and sunglasses, making it impossible to identify him. It was clear that whoever sent the letter didn't want to be found. Matt advised us to be cautious and to consider hiring security for our home. The thought of needing security was terrifying, but we had to protect our family. We hired a security firm to install cameras and monitor our property. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew. We were living in a state of constant vigilance, unsure of what would happen next. Then, one night, everything came to a head. It was late, and the house was quiet. The kids were asleep, and Sarah and I were watching TV. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the backyard. I grabbed a baseball bat and went to investigate, with Sarah following close behind. We found one of the security cameras smashed to pieces and a note taped to the back door. It read, "This is your final warning. Stop digging or face the consequences." We called the police, and they arrived quickly. They took the note and the broken camera as evidence, but there wasn't much they could do. We were left feeling more vulnerable than ever. The next day, Matt called with some unexpected news. He had been digging into Alex's connections and had discovered something shocking. Alex had been involved with a powerful criminal organization, and his death was likely a result of internal conflicts within the group. The letter and the threats were their way of warning us to back off. Matt advised us to lay low and stop investigating. It was a hard pill to swallow, but we had to prioritize our safety. We decided to take a break from everything and go on a family vacation to clear our heads and escape the stress. As we packed up and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The past few years had been a roller coaster of emotions and unexpected twists, but I was determined to protect my family and move forward. The vacation was just what we needed. We spent 2 weeks in a secluded cabin by the lake, enjoying the peace and quiet. It was a chance to reconnect and remind ourselves of what truly mattered. When we returned home, things had calmed down. The surveillance and the strange occurrences stopped, and life slowly returned to normal. We remained cautious, but hopeful that the worst was behind us. Through it all, I learned that life is unpredictable and full of challenges, but with love, support, and determination, we can overcome even the most daunting obstacles. As I looked at my family, I knew that we would face whatever came our way together.